Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert, and today I have a special treat for you. We're doing a little different. Oftentimes, we discuss various topics of ancient mythology and things, but today we're diving into the cult of Scientology, especially with breaking news that Danny Masterson got life. I understand the word 30 comes in, the number 30 years comes in, but he actually got life and was charged, I believe, for 2 rapes that he had been guilty of. And they gave him life to up to 30 years. Then he can, I guess you'd say, try to get out. But ultimately, you're out in a body bag. As I saw Aaron Smith-Levin did a video with a lawyer. My special guest today is Claire Headley. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good, Derek. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey, I really appreciate you. You were part of this case. You were one of the expert witnesses on giving background to Scientology. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, no, that is correct. And for backstory first, I was born into Scientology. I spent the first 30 years of my life in Scientology. My mother joined the C organization, which is where members sign a billion-year contract when I was 4 years old. So I was very quickly submersed completely and seemingly irrevocably into the inner circle of Scientology, as it were. The C organization is a paramilitary elite organization that runs all of Scientology internationally. I joined the C organization at the age of 16, and I worked for 14 years at the headquarters. It's a 500-acre compound located in the isolated desert in Riverside County, California. Of those 14 years, I spent 8 years working in Religious Technology Center. Religious Technology Center, also known as RTC, is the highest ecclesiastical organization in Scientology, run directly by David Miscavige.
Wow.
And for 4 of the years that I worked in Religious Technology Center on their org chart, I was technically number 3. So that's some of the background of my experience in Scientology that led to me being approached and asked to testify as an expert witness in relation to the policies, the procedures in Scientology, as well as the insular language of Scientology that is very difficult to understand to a layman that has never heard of Scientology before. So that's kind of the backdrop. I studied Scientology in excess of 10,000 hours in those 30 years. I had reached OT level 5, which nobody probably cares, but it's the upper levels on the grade chart, the bridge to total freedom, as it were. And also I was trained as a counselor and studied Scientology management policy extensively. Again, all of that for context, because as somebody who was born and raised in Scientology, I do not have a high school diploma. I don't have a college degree. So, this is the experience and knowledge base I have that resulted in my testimony in relation to Scientology's practices, policies, and procedures when it comes to any crime committed within that organization.
So there's a lot. Usually, I would interview someone to get their story of how you escaped this cult. And I hope maybe we can do that. We're doing things backwards today because such breaking news happened. I wanted to jump on this to understand the dynamic because there was a case, I guess you'd say initially there was a trial. And that trial turned out to be in favor in a way. It leaned in the direction to kind of support or help Danny Miscavige. I could be mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I on the wrong path here?
Yes, there's a few elements here. First of all, the criminal trial, I believe the investigation started in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, or thereabouts, and finally came to trial last year. It resulted in a hung jury. So it was not in favor, it was a hung jury. And that's then ended up being retried. I think it's important to note that in the first trial, the defense had presented that they were not going to question that the events took place. They had different legal strategies as to how they were going to argue Danny Masterson's alleged innocence. Because of that, the judge ruled to eliminate any reference to Scientology, any reference to the reports that were written, any reference to other Scientologists' involvement and knowledge of the events that took place. And that proceeding ended in a mistrial. So the prosecution opted to retry. And because the defense during the course of the first trial and leading into the second trial started to change their strategy to say, well, we're questioning whether these things even happened. That is what opened the door to Scientology needing to be talked about and discussed and being allowed to be talked about and discussed by the judge in the second trial.
The viewers might go that haven't heard. There's probably people who watch my channel. Danny Masterson was a Scientologist? Yes, his whole family were and are Scientologists. So why, the question is, why is Scientology, why does it have anything to do with this guy who had perverted intentions? And then I'd like to connect those dots as we go through this discussion with you. But ultimately, like, how is it even relevant? Can you tell us, Claire?
Yep, absolutely. It's important to understand, first of all, yes, Danny Masterson was born and raised in Scientology, to my knowledge. I do not know him personally. But it is important to understand that in Scientology, a Scientologist will deal with any situation they run into in their life with and in Scientology. There are thousands of policies where Hubbard, the founder, has mandated that Scientologists are not to call the police, not to involve the authorities. There's an inherent and deep mistrust of any authority. In fact, if you look at the history of Scientology, you'll see that the FBI raided their facilities in 1977, and they were found guilty of the largest infiltration of the U.S. government in its history. That's just the backdrop to understand a lot of the mistrust of any government agencies, police, etc. It's ingrained into the policy, structure, and belief of Scientology that the justice system is corrupt, that police are corrupt, that no crime should be reported, that any Scientologist should be handled. If a Scientologist commits a crime, they should be handled with and in Scientology, and the authorities are not to be involved.
And in this case, just kind of giving it context to what Danny Masterson has happened. Someone might go, okay, so Scientology has really bad policies and it seems like very culty cult mentality about, keep everything going to the religious people within the bubble, don't get it out. And this has happened with Jehovah's Witnesses with recent, accusations of rape cases. And they have these weird policies that they'll go back to the Old Testament and find where it says, well, if there's not 2 or 3 witnesses, who's going to watch what's happening in a private room between you and a bad stepfather or something? So they have these weird policies that almost protect them from being able to get caught unless their own infrastructure was looking out to try and resolve those themselves. But I just don't see it happening, especially with someone high ranking like Danny. So the question is, their policies are bad. They're aimed at protecting themselves, even at the cost of going and hurting other people and their reputation, taking them down. We've heard this before about Scientology. How does this connect with what Danny did to these women?
Yes. So these crimes were committed in the early 2000s. And so, for example, one of the pieces that I was required to testify about is just the mechanics of how it works in Scientology. A civilian Scientologist is somebody like the Jane Does or Danny Masterson. They are required to report to their local organization, which is most of those are staffed by members of the C organization, the paramilitary elite organization that we talked about. Mm-hmm. And the ethics officer in any Scientology organization is, for all intents and purposes, from a Scientologist perspective, their local police officer. So when a crime is committed, and it then is subject to what's called a knowledge report, a written document outlining the crime that was perpetrated, and that's turned into the ethics officer, who then handles this by dealing with all parties involved. Some of the mechanisms that are built into Scientology is, for one example, the overt motivator sequence is a term coined by L. Ron Hubbard to indicate that if you are the victim of a crime, the only reason for that is because you've committed your own crimes, and therefore you're at fault for what a Scientologist calls pulling it in. Victim shaming, for all intents and purposes, is really what we're talking about here. So there,
Can I comment on this real quick? Just so this is almost like a karma type thing, where if a crime happens to you, unless I bet if it happened to him, it wouldn't be that case. But if a crime happened to you, then it's circular within the bubble of like the blame game still points back at you.
yeah, it's not karma, but just because I've talked to other people that understand karma, and they're like, yeah, no, it's not that at all. It's very unique to Scientology, but similar. You're right, in terms of if you are the victim of a crime, it's because you've done that same thing that you're accusing the person of, whether it be in this lifetime or earlier lifetimes. But it's because of something you've done that caused you to deserve that, quote unquote. And again, it's victim shaming, and not to mention the fact that, again, you're not allowed to report to the police. Scientology acts to protect itself, maintain public relations, and on top of that, a Scientologist believes that by reporting to their Scientologist police officer, that's the only option the perpetrator has for salvation, or to be fixed, or handled, as it were. Whatever terminology you want to use, that's the belief in Scientology. And even from Religious Technology Center, a matter of concern is if a Scientologist tries to report something to the police. It's something that they absolutely crush and do not allow.
So technically, these women, specifically on the case, did they go to some of these ethic officers or try to go to anyone in Scientology?
Yes, they did. They reported it to their local ethics officer, as they were required to do. They were all Scientologists at the time the crimes were perpetrated. I think it's also important to understand that in Scientology, there is a practice known as fair game, where if you go against their rules and step outside their boundary and decide, you know what, to hell with it, I'm going to go to the police anyway, you're now subject to fair game. What does fair game mean? That means they are going to destroy you utterly. They're going to go to great lengths to make sure that all your family are cut off. If, for example, if you had a child in a daycare that was run by a Scientologist, your child would get kicked out. You'd lose your job if you're working for a Scientologist, which is very often the case. Scientology is a small world. And, so the ramifications are, it destroys your life, period.
Wow. So they went to the ethic officers, or whoever their ethics officer was, and it's clear that nothing happened. Again, it's a circular, well, if that did happen, and
it's not that nothing happened. They were,
okay.
the victims were targeted and put through extensive handlings. One of them was even put under a Scientology gag order and not allowed to speak or say anything about the crime that had been committed. So, Scientology had their hands in the mix extensively. And where my testimony came in, again, was to explain the terms, the policies, like ethics officer, knowledge reports. How does that work? There's another whole part of Scientology policy where if a Scientologist is in what they refer to as good standing, as Danny Masterson was, then any reports should be, quote, filed with a yawn, unquote. Meaning there's no consequences in Scientology. So you get the isolation that occurred of these victims. And by the way, let's not forget, this has been 20 plus years of fighting, trying to get justice for crimes perpetrated against them.
Wow, there's so much here that's just buried. There's more context to this. These women, some of them, were also Scientologists. So they were within the bubble. Not all. I'm sure there were others that he dated that may not have fit the Scientology cult. They weren't in it, but they were Scientologists, and they went to the ethics officer. Then they're kind of being silenced and then targeted when they actually went to police officers.
That's right.
So they did go through the right ranks, through the right process, got turned down, and now they're having to go. Did they get a chance to speak during this trial at all?
Yes. At least two of the Jane Does, to my knowledge, gave victim impact statements at the sentencing. And of course, during the course of the trial, they testified and then were cross-examined not only once in gruesome detail of every single thing that happened, but twice through the course of 2 trials. I mean, that, the part I played was very small compared to what these women have fought through, and again, at great cost at the hands of Scientology. It's my understanding that Jane Doe 1's mother, who actually, and again, we talked about this beforehand, I would like to reference and have people read over on Leah Remini's Substack. Leah posted a letter that Jane Doe 1's mother wrote, who is currently a Scientologist, by the way. Jane Doe 1's mother wrote a letter to David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, demanding that justice be brought to bear on Danny Masterson for the crimes perpetrated against her daughter. And subsequently, the mother told Jane Doe 1, yes, I want justice for Danny Masterson, but not at the expense of my religion. And the mother has since disconnected from Jane Doe 1 and will not talk to her and would not testify on her behalf. Yet there's evidence. She herself submitted reports in writing stating she had knowledge of the crime that had been committed.
This is a very deep situation that takes a lot to unravel, especially for someone on the outside. I think you probably played a much larger role to the jury's understanding of the cult and how it protected Danny, because a lot of people who are watching, I've even seen comments before we started live, they are saying things like, the guy's innocent. It's hearsay. There's no physical evidence to put this guy behind bars for life, blah, blah, blah. There's endless things. They probably don't know the case. They're probably as ignorant about the case as me. But can you tell us why they were willing and wanting to convict him that long? Like what the evidence came out in favor for the women's testimonies? How did it help validate that this wasn't just hearsay?
Well, I mean, there are reports. Obviously, I'm not going to speak to the proceedings of the trial. Aaron Smith-Levin, growing up in Scientology, covered the second trial day by day with absolute detail of all the testimony that was given. Again, every day that the trial was in progress was covered in great length. So anyone who wants to form an opinion should go watch all of those videos before doing so. The important thing here is that a jury of his peers found him guilty based on everything, the case that the prosecution presented, which included reports that were made at the time the crimes were committed to Scientology. So when there's written reports and extensive documentation, and believe you me, the reports that are included in the trial are just a fraction of the reports that exist in Scientology's files. Let's not forget, Danny Masterson had Jane Doe 1 sign a non-disclosure agreement and paid her $400,000. Just
What?
let that sink in for a moment. And not only that, in Jane Doe 1's victim impact statement at sentencing, she brought up the fact that Danny Masterson also paid money to Scientology towards her daughter's Scientology account so that the daughter could receive Scientology counseling for any emotional impact his crimes against her mother had on the daughter, who was 9 years old at the time.
That is, I did not know this. By any chance, while you were still active, what year was it you blew? And for those,
2000 January 2005 is when I escaped, in layman's terms.
okay, so yeah, escape slash what they call blown, and in fact, your husband has a book, Blown for Good. We're gonna plug that here in a minute. I wanted to make sure everybody's trickling in and getting caught up to what we're doing here before we promote both. But I did pin in the comment section. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. They also have a website. They have a book. So, did you hear in those few years when these crimes were happening, as you were an active member? Did you hear anything through the grapevine about this stuff happening when it was going on?
Not specifically, no, though that any activities that took place at Celebrity Center were kept pretty eyes only, confidential. Reports were always sent weekly to David and Shelley Miscavige of anything and everything relating to celebrities. Scientology has a pretty strong culture where they protect and keep their celebrities safe, which is probably part of the appeal for people like Tom Cruise. I don't know. But even down to, like, they have fake names on their counseling folders and things like that. So no, I had no specific knowledge or interaction with these specific events,
Right.
though there are many other crimes that, yes, I was aware of, and I knew and saw how Scientology covered those up, and have done since as well.
So you're not only someone who has seen how they behave, what they do, you know the language, you know L. Ron Hubbard's, I'll call it his code of how to behave, how to act towards someone who becomes an enemy of Scientology. And to become an enemy, it doesn't take very much, it seems.
It doesn't. It could be as small as making a joke at a show. That can trigger, look at so on our YouTube channel, Mark, my husband, has started doing a series called The Spy Files. And just as an example, in there, he breaks down some internal documents that we have from Scientology's Office of Special Affairs, their spy wing. But for example, the South Park episode back in 2005 that exposed some of the behaviors of Scientology, the creators of that show were targeted. Scientology was working to infiltrate them, get to them, silence them, muzzle them. That's just the practice of fair game, includes literally, as a direct quote, their goal is to muzzle and silence and attack. And their policy is always attack, never defend. Anyway, we could go on and on. There are thousands of such policies. It's not an isolated instance, and nor, unfortunately, is this trial an isolated instance of the crimes that Scientology covers up.
Wow. I kind of wondered, based on your testimony, was Aaron in the courtroom when you gave your testimony, or how did they go about interviewing you?
Yes, Aaron was in the court every day. He was in the press row at the back. So he was there the day that I testified, yes.
Did you get any compliments in the way that you expressed these things? Do you think that the jury really was, I guess, educated to a point where it was like, wow, okay, everything from the testimonies that come forward from when these acts happen to these various women, it's not like they lined up and communicated that these are various people over years, correct, that are experiencing these things. 2 they nailed them for, but how many came forward? Do you have an idea of the number of how many came forward saying that
How
he
many
did them?
victims there are?
Right.
To my knowledge, it's at least 7 or 8.
Wow.
Yeah. And unfortunately, for context, this is not about me. It's about these victims. And
Of
there's
course.
nothing, there's nothing rewarding about having to go testify up against $1 billion cult that's bent and set on destroying me. No. But it's the right thing to do, and it's the only option I felt I had. It's just the right thing to do, period. People need to know. It's I think the knowledge of what Scientology does and how they operate has been tremendously impacted by events over the last decade. When Mark and I first escaped, we were some of the only people speaking out. That there were a handful of other people, but we all knew it was a terrifying experience, and we were now going to be targets. As momentum has built over the last decade, especially with Going Clear, the HBO documentary based on Lawrence Wright's book. And then also, of course, Leah Remini and Mike Rinder, Scientology in the Aftermath, the 3 seasons of that show. The public awareness of the practices of Scientology that destroy people's lives is far better known now than it ever was previously. And I think that makes a huge impact. But my efforts in my testimony were to essentially break down the basics of, this is what happens in Scientology when a crime is committed, with the presumption on my part that the jury had no knowledge of it. It's very easy to get deep in the weeds with Scientology because of the language of it. It's its own language. So that's what I was trying to really break down and just make very clear.
You said before the women came forward to ethic officers. Now they're blown in a way because they're enemies now. They've gone to police. They're trying to get justice for what happened to them and get this guy in trouble for the things he did. In what ways were they fair gamed, which means Scientology went after them? And I want to turn this also onto yourself. I know this isn't about you, but you're the witness who's explaining these words and definitions and what the meaning of these things are, not only to my audience, but you were in the courtroom. Have you been fair gamed? What happened to these women? And then if you could tell us a little bit about your own experience.
Yep, absolutely. So I don't know these women, so I can't really speak to exactly what experiences they've had and what fair game has been committed on them. But I will say that there's a civil trial now pending that I know details that at great length. But I know that it included even just stalking, following private investigators. And none of that is any surprise to me. We've had my husband and I, Mark started speaking out in 2006. I started speaking out in 2008. I personally was terrified to speak out at the outset. What drove me to change my mind about that was the day that when my son, I had two young children at the time. This was 2008. My oldest was 2, and my youngest was maybe 4 months old. And Child Services showed up at our door and said that they'd received an anonymous tip and that they were required by law to come pay us a visit, that they had looked into it and it was obviously bogus. And the gentleman who came said, "You need to watch your back. Somebody's causing trouble for you." And there was just simply no question in my mind. Can I prove that it was them? No, I can't. Did I give this person's card to the FBI? You betcha. Absolutely. And, at that point, I just was like, what am I going to do? Sit and be terrified of $1 billion cult? Do I want my children to be terrified of this cult? No, I don't. And I'm going to stand up and speak my truth and talk about my experiences and help educate the public so that innocent people can't also be dragged in and deceived and have their lives destroyed as a result.
And I know Mark, I think recently I saw him on a podcast or on one of your shows where he said that one of these PIs, an older gentleman, literally was like crouched behind his car, like wanting to get ran over. So then who's the bad guy? Mark. He ran some guy over who's purposely behind the vehicle. Aaron Smith Levin, he had, recorded recently a PI outside his house, parked in a truck. And he's like, hey man, what's up? What's up, man? And it's like, oh man. So they're still doing this age old L. Ron Hubbard tactic. And do you know of any of the testimonies of what the women were saying about how they were fair gamed? I could be wrong here, but I heard through the grapevine, someone's dog died. They may have poisoned a dog. They do various tactics to try and get under your skin and scare you.
They really do. They really do. I mean, and yes, I heard that as well, which is obviously devastating. Unfortunately, there are historically other examples of Scientology doing that. Of course, they will, they hire the lawyer who hires the private investigator. So when it comes to, finding a paper trail, they intentionally make it very, very challenging. They've been doing this for 7 decades. They use tax-exempt dollars to go after people aggressively. They have hate websites up on my husband and I with POW videos of my mother, my husband's mother, my brother, my stepfather. I mean, what the heck? If they're really this wonderful organization, then why on earth do they have sites dedicated to just hate? And I'm just telling my story. So what's wrong with that? Isn't that my First Amendment right to speak my truth and talk about my experiences? I don't want other people to suffer what I suffered. So anyway, they have been doing this for 7 decades and they get away with it. And there are many, many examples. They had Ron Miscavige Sr., rest in peace, the father of David Miscavige. There were private investigators being paid $10,000 a week to watch him. There was another person, Pat Broker, who had private investigators on him for, I think, 20 years.
Wow.
That this is no joke. And they are, Scientology is continuing these tactics to this day. They have aggressively gone after trying to destroy Mark's business, my business, and again, is this a religion? Is this what a religion does? No, this is what a $1 billion cult does and is allowed to get away with.
You said they have videos of your family. So I suspect there's some of your family from both Mark's side and your side that are still active members. Are these videos that they're using them against you, weaponizing them to try and like defame or make your whole testimony not something valid?
They've had these videos for years now, but yes, our immediate family are all still in Scientology. I will say that if anyone has any question as to Scientology's involvement in this trial, a really good example that shines a light on answering that question is this. The day that I was called in March by the prosecution and told that I would be testifying, they told me that the defense had named an expert witness to counter my testimony. And that expert witness was none other than my stepfather, who, yes, has appeared in hate videos speaking against me.
Wow. This whole thing is just, I'm shocked it's still happening. It's kind of strange that America has this. I followed the whole Leah Remini show and watched all of your testimony on there, Mark's testimony. I mean, it's just a deep dive into this cult, exposing it for what it is. And I'm just shocked that our system is allowing this thing to still thrive after everything that it continues to do. We're so protective of religious freedom that it's like, this is much more than just a religion. I mean, it's hiding. It's a business. It's a cult that is hiding behind this religious facade. And that just blows me away. I'm shocked by it.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. I am too. And that's why I work tirelessly to speak the truth, to help people get out through the Aftermath Foundation, and to continue shining a light, because nothing else is going to affect a change. But there is a change starting to take place in terms of public awareness. And we're going to do everything we can to keep that momentum going. We receive messages all the time from people still in Scientology working to get out. So that's what our focus is, what better way to make up for the 30 years we spent in a cult than helping other people get out and helping educate people in, the public in general so that they don't fall for it.
I don't know the legal system very well myself, but I am curious to know, when I think of someone getting charged a large amount of time, I imagine they got caught with a car full of cocaine and meth, or I'm imagining in my head, or they murdered someone, that, obviously an eye for an eye kind of thing, a tooth for a tooth. But in this case, I heard he gets life. How has that been received in your perception of looking at this? Like, this guy got nailed for serious time. And a lot of people on the outside might go, does that really equate with the heinous acts that he did? Of course, they were terrible, but the amount of time. I'm curious to know, as someone who was in there, hearing the court proceedings, watching what happened, what is your opinion about that as far as the amount of time he got and where he's not able to, is it review after 30 years?
It's life in prison with the first possibility of parole at 30 years is my understanding. And again, I'm no lawyer. And actually, to be fair, I was only in the courtroom the one day that I gave testimony, and I didn't listen to any of it. So again, I would refer everyone to Growing Up in Scientology. Aaron Smith-Levin covered day by day extensively the coverage of what went on in that trial. And again, to anyone who wants to make judgment, just go through all that testimony in detail before you, because a jury of peers has found him guilty of 2 of 3 charges. So the reason for the sentence is because, and again, I don't want to speak out of turn, but my understanding is that one charge was 15 to life, but two charges is what results in the life sentence. And factor in too, there are other victims, there are other anyway, again, just go through all the facts of the trial. And again, these women have been fighting this fight since the early 2000s when these crimes were perpetrated. And finally, after getting no justice from Scientology, were willing to have their entire lives destroyed at the hands of the practice of fair game, and went to the police. But there was no delay in reporting. And it's very important to understand that there is extensive reports, even that Scientology has not turned over, about these crimes.
That is so important what you just said, because when I first heard of this, people were saying, there's always a complaint, oh, well, it took years for them to come forward. He's famous. They just want the clout. They just want his money. They just this, that, right? And that's happened in history, right? But what I don't think is people giving enough credit for people who are really victims of situations like this. And that's the sad part, is they're so quick to try and find, well, what's their real motives? And this part is something that I didn't know when I first was hearing about the case, is how right out the gate, they really did try to do it. But if you know everything you're describing to the jury about Scientology, then you can understand why it may have taken a year or even 2 for them to finally go to an officer, depending on the case. I'm just saying it took a little bit of time before they went from this person to actually outside sources as Scientologists. That's another thing, is I wonder if some of the psychology of a cult member, especially this kind, is something you helped the jury see, even though you may not have spent that much time explaining that. It's like, if you knew what it was like to be a cult member trapped in this kind of bubble of, I need to obey and I need to be part of this or else I'll lose my identity, that plays a significant role on how you're going to just go out and screw the whole life and my identity in order to risk that to try and get the help that I need. That's huge.
Yeah. And it's my understanding, and again, I don't know any of I don't know the Jane Does, and I don't know the facts of the case, but it is my understanding that it was only much later when, for example, they learned there were other victims that they were like, what? And I've had that experience too, where I go, well, yeah, I suffered, and yes, bad things happened, but I'm just me. But then when you find out there are many other victims, it really changes your perspective, and it also changes the need to go, no, this is not okay. And regardless of personal consequences, regardless of having your life destroyed, as I've experienced firsthand, you go, no, the right thing to do is to speak up and bring justice. And hats off to these women for the courageous fight that they've been going at for 2 decades to try and bring justice and expose what they were victims of.
This is why I love doing what I'm doing and talking to people who are ex-cult members or part of some high control group, and they come out and they speak, they give their story, their testimony, their truth. And you're doing that even in this way. I can't wait to get your actual story sometime about your escape and your husband's. But I am just, my encouragement to the viewer, if they're anything like me, is to go and show love to people who are doing this. People like you, people like Karen de la Carriere, people like Aaron Smith Levin, the various ex-Scientologists and people that are trying to wake people up and help them get out, find freedom outside, because it's beautiful out here. It's
Sure is.
practically better. Yeah. I have some questions I'm sure that have popped up in the super chats. If you're interested in helping me chip away at those, while we
Sure.
have the 490 people watching, hit the like button. Be sure to go and subscribe to their YouTube channel. Her and her husband are doing the best they can to kind of expose and help people find freedom, because there are some stories out there. I mean, I interviewed Ron Miscavige. What an interview. He is a hoot. When he was still around, he was a hoot.
Yes.
And he called it like he saw it. And he was explaining all these things. I've talked to several ex-Scientologists. This is the book, Blown for Good. Get the audio book. You can get it here on Amazon. But if you're interested in getting the hardcover, you can go to their website, blownforgood.com.
Yes.
Before
We have paperback and hardback. Yes. Blown for Good, Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology by my husband, Mark Headley.
That is amazing. I'm so glad he speaks out. What is it specifically this book covers, so people know?
Sure. It covers his childhood growing up in Scientology, his 14 or 15 years working at the management headquarters in Riverside County, California. It includes the police report from when he was escaping, and the Scientology security officers ran him off the road. A passerby saw this happen, called 911, which is the only reason either of us, frankly, are here today speaking out, is because the Riverside County Sheriff's Office responded and helped Mark to escape, and I escaped 3 weeks later. So yeah, this is Mark's story of his experiences in Scientology, working directly with the leader, David Miscavige. Tom Cruise counseled Mark, and so there's stories about that for those who need the Tom Cruise piece. But either way,
So, and I've even heard some of his testimony before in other interviews, so it's really spicy. I mean, we're talking physical abuse, similar to like Mike. Mike had physical abuse, but from what I understood, your husband had a little bit more in some ways, in different.
not more than Mike Rinder. I mean, Mike
No.
Rinder spent years in the hole.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Okay.
yes, there, of course, it was an environment that engendered physical violence, starting with David Miscavige. I personally witnessed David Miscavige abuse multiple executives many, many times over the 8 years that I was in Religious Technology Center. So I personally saw David Miscavige abuse Mike Rinder, for example. Guillaume Leserve, Mark Ingber, Mark Yeager, Norman Starkey, all the top executives over years. I witnessed that. And again, that's a big part of why I'm here today. I was a prisoner of that compound. So I was in no position to call 911, for example. There was no way to call 911. But what I can do is share my experiences and help other people get out. And that's why I'm here today.
I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad that people like you exist, having the courage to do so. It's important that you were being true to yourself. You couldn't stay in that cult and be true to yourself any longer. It was time. And so I want people to support what you're doing. Go subscribe, check out the website, get the book, listen to it on Audible. We do plan on getting Mark on and you to talk about your testimony and dive deep into that. So let's get to the Q&A if you're down.
Yep. Sounds good. Yep.
Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much for the love today. It seems like he's the only one who's I know him personally on Facebook. Only one who's super chatted here so far, but big super chats. Thank you. I wonder what upper level Scientology compares to the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Looks like one governing body member may be in some big trouble. Us ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are more up to speed than the elders in the kingdom halls.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know how it compares. That's the thing. My expertise is in Scientology,
Right.
But I do know, for example, that David Miscavige had a lot of he actually had research being done to mimic the tithing system that the Mormons use, for example. But yeah, it would be interesting to break that down and really compare how the control mechanisms work from one to another. Yeah.
I think that Scientology, just based on how I've seen it operate, is far more business and manipulative in different ways. Just my comparison. I'm not saying Jehovah's Witnesses aren't,
right.
But I feel like the Jehovah's Witnesses use more religious manipulation than just straight up street dirty tactic type manipulation that you find in Scientology, in my opinion. I mean, I'm looking at both and I'm saying I could see like a really greedy business person do that. I could see someone who's really just kind of lost drinking the Kool-Aid, I like to call it, of believing in crazy things and then do that. I could see that the difference. So that's why a lot of ex-Scientologists like yourself are looking at this going, yes, it has the religion, umbrella. It's appearing like a religion. However, this is far from just some religion. I mean, it's much more of a business kind of thing, almost a self-help business model. I don't know.
Yeah. No, and Scientology intentionally started using a lot more of the trappings, if you will, of a church in 1993, specifically to win the IRS tax exemption. For example, prominently featuring their version of a cross, or they started for a while, which has long since ceased, but they started saying they were doing Sunday services, which is complete nonsense. I was born into it. I've never attended a Sunday service ever.
Wow.
So, and again, don't judge a book by its cover, right? So, but one other thought that you brought to mind is sometimes people kind of erroneously think, oh, this practice of disconnection is similar to excommunication. It's very, very different. Disconnection is essentially Scientology locking the door on you. So, for example, in my case, I escaped. They declared me a suppressive person, and they gave Mark and I a freeloader bill, it's called, for $159,000 total between the two of us. And so if I ever wanted to speak to my mother ever again, I'd have to pay that bill. I'd have to go through extensive steps, making up the damage, quote unquote, and recounting anything I'd ever said, and go back into Scientology. Those are the requirements if I ever want to speak to my mother ever again.
Imagine what the bill is now. After your involvement in so many things that are helping to get people out. Well, we're going to make that $7 trillion over here.
Yeah.
That's
And and at that point, I just have to go, you know what? I recognize now that the love from my family was always only ever conditional on my involvement, commitment, and dedication to Scientology. And that's just not how real life works. That's not a family bond. That's a family bond that's been corrupted and destroyed by Scientology.
that is so. Oh my goodness, that is a show in and of itself. I mean, I think about my family. I believe things differently than my family. They love me unconditionally.
Right.
It has no bearing. Like I could go different paths and they would love me regardless of my thinking, of what I believe or think. That idea that my whole family would be conditionally loving me based on this identity that they've been given based on this cult.
Right.
That's crazy. It's hard for me to even understand.
Yeah. Yep, and unfortunately, I've come to terms with it myself, at least for the most part. I have good days and I have bad days, but I really, I at the end of the day, had I stayed and not escaped, I'd be dead now. I know that in my heart. I have no question about it. And so, at the end of the day, too, I think we have to make decisions that we can live with. That when you lay your head down, you have to be at peace with yourself. And I can't make decisions for my family, but I can protect my children and know that I will only ever surround my children with unconditional love. And that's what I can do. That's what I do have control over.
Do you have any hope on any of your family members that are in right now coming out?
Well, I'm never going to give up hope. I will always find forgiveness in my heart, but honestly, I think that someone has to want forgiveness and they have to stop enabling a destructive cult to earn forgiveness. So
Mm.
I'm willing to forgive them if they ask for it.
Wow.
And I will never give up hope.
Wow. Good. I love your answer. Constellation Pegasus again. Watchtower has been losing a lot of court cases lately. Time will eventually catch up with them, like their now twice failed 1914 date is an apocalyptic date. It's just a matter of time. They have made a lot of enemies. I can't imagine Scientology is not in the same boat. Do you see its impending end, or do you see a transformation having to happen? Because I said this in an interview I did with Mike. I said, Mike, it looks like they're going to have to get rid of this narcissistic leader in order for them to even keep this thing alive. Like, why can't he just retire into just shadows, take a lot of that money and shut up and leave this thing to someone way more empathizing and better of a person? I don't understand.
Right. Well, it's a great question from the outside looking in,
Right.
and I don't disagree with the question. David Miscavige has very carefully manipulated himself into a complete position of ultimate power, and so he's going to, over his dead body, will that change? He's if you look at the history of it, when L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986, David Miscavige very carefully manipulated any other key players off the board, as it were. And now he's vanished his wife, Shelley Miscavige, who hasn't been seen publicly in around 18 years. And so that's just, and again, there's all kinds of examples that you can cite as to what Scientology does. Certainly, I'm grateful for Google, because now if somebody goes, "Oh, what about Scientology?" just Google it. You'll be good. You won't fall in that trap.
That is, oh, it makes me want to ask you about Shelley, but I mean, I don't know if there's any new news, but it again gets to that psychology of this cult and your identity. I can't imagine anyone who's as popular as her. She doesn't even realize how popular she is, maybe.
Yep.
Is
She
just
doesn't.
not, yeah, what is going on with that other than it has its claws gripped in her?
Right. Yes. So I have a whole series on our channel, Where is Shelley Miscavige? I'm up to, I think, 15 episodes now. I've been interviewing every single person who knew her personally. I worked with her personally for 8 years, worked with her
Wow.
very closely and reported to her almost daily for 4 of those years. she is a real person. But the sad part is that she was dragged into Scientology roughly at the age of 6. She was then sent away to work directly with L. Ron Hubbard. And when she was around 11 or 12, she was on the Apollo ship with L. Ron Hubbard without her parents, never saw her parents. Her older sister is also in the Sea Organization. So unfortunately, it speaks to the level of indoctrination and control over somebody's life. But she is a prisoner of David Miscavige, of Scientology, and unfortunately also of her own belief system at this point. And I hope that she will wake up one day and realize that there's a lot of people concerned about her. Personally, I'm using the question, where is Shelley Miscavige, which of course Leah Remini started when she got out of Scientology and filed a missing person report with the LAPD. But I'm using it to highlight that this happens in Scientology. There are so many other executives in Scientology who also haven't been seen publicly in decades. And to me, this question, where is Shelley, just epitomizes what's wrong with Scientology. In this day and age, Scientology can and does get away with vanishing people.
I was thinking about, I always forget the names, but Mike Render, like while he was at that transition point, there was a spokesperson for Scientology, young guy, slick black hair.
Tommy Davis.
Yep. Really, he was charismatic. He had all that. And I was like, where'd this guy go? Like, what happened to this guy? And I'm not saying he's not out there, but I imagine if you tried to pin him down to talk, he's not going to talk. He's probably, again, everybody shut your mouths. Don't talk about this thing. Avoid it. Who knows if they bribed him or threatened him, or who knows? I can't imagine.
Well, first of all, he's Ann Archer's son. So you should know that, because she's a Scientologist in good standing. You can bet your bottom dollar they're going to keep him quiet. He actually escaped too and fled to Las Vegas. And he was married to Jessica Feshbach, she was one of the daughters of the Feshbach brothers, who have donated millions of dollars to Scientology. So it's just important to look at the reasons Scientology has to keep somebody quiet. But Tommy Davis is out there. He's remarried, and his silence speaks volumes, because yes, Tommy Davis has witnessed crimes. He's perpetrated crimes at the orders of Scientology. He worked very, very closely with Tom Cruise and David Miscavige. Oddly enough, Tommy Davis was also one of the only members of the Sea Organization, actually, who was made Tom Cruise's assistant for several years. So again, it's just layer upon layer of corruption, and it's important to understand the facts.
Oh my gosh. There's so much to get into with this. Constellation Pegasus says, from what I'm hearing here, I'm positive Watchtower has done just as bad or worse things. The internet is Watchtower's worst enemy, can't hide from their history anymore. It's incredible how much damage they're suffering now. So just so you know, ex Jehovah's Witness here, but there's this overlap that he's seeing and saying, hey, another cult, another.
Yeah. Even the name Watchtower sounds like Guardian's office, which is now referred to as Office of Special Affairs. Probably, different playbook. Probably, much more vicious, because that's kind of the nature of the beast. It's interesting, actually. One time somebody was telling us that they'd been studying all about high control organizations and cults as part of a college course. And there was a study done. I wish I'd gotten what this study was, but this person told us that the study found that it took at least 3 times longer for someone to recover from Scientology as other similar high control groups. Wow. Which really doesn't surprise me very much. And again, like my first language was not English, it was Scientology from the age of 4. So, it's just layer upon layer of indoctrination. And It's quite the process to make it through all that. There's so many amazing books, though. I always very highly recommend Barefaced Messiah by Russell Miller. It's a deep dive into the actual facts of who L. Ron Hubbard is and was, because even every fact that's presented to Scientologists is not true. There's, slivers of little pieces that might have some basis in reality, but this book does an amazing job of exposing who even is this person. Like, and it's true. If you're going to dedicate your life and hurt people and destroy people and do someone's bidding unquestioningly, at least know whose writings you're following, please.
That brings Joseph Smith to my attention, because I actually study all this stuff and learning historically who people were and the origins of cults, movements. And if you ask someone who's in Mormonism, who's on a mission or something like that, because they'll come and knock on the door from time to time, and I'm like, hey, what's up? Very friendly. I'll have deep dive conversations, and they'll probably be walking out going, let's not go back to that house. But I'm very nice to them. I don't try to be rude, but like the same thing. If they knew the history of Joseph Smith, not the apologetic whitewashed version that they've been given, they might have a different spin and understanding of their founder, just like L. Ron Hubbard. So very interesting to just try and connect those dots. Constellation's back again. Does Scientology shun family members when they leave? Watchtower does and considers them spiritually dead. After all, Armageddon is right around the corner. Pretty sad state of affairs.
So I'm not sure exactly of the mechanisms of shunning, but disconnection is the mechanism of disconnection. Like I mentioned briefly, is I was declared a suppressive person. My family were forced to disconnect from me. They cannot have any communication with me. If they do, they risk expulsion from Scientology themselves. And, if you ask a Scientologist, they'll say, well, I can't talk to that person. If I do, I'm risking the entire future of this planet and mankind. So my understanding is disconnection is far more extreme than any other similar example, though I could be wrong, because again, I don't know the mechanics of shunning, but disconnection is complete. You will not have any contact with any person still in Scientology unless you go back to Scientology.
And then you can add another layer, I suspect, on who you are if you're leaving. The whole fair game thing, because I don't know any examples I can think of where Jehovah's Witnesses might shun. Then they got to add salt to the wounds or chase and try to actually hurt the person who's no longer part of their association. That's a level I've never heard any other cults do that, not in contemporary times, that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's some, but I can't imagine it's common. No. That is a common practice.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And disconnection and the practice of fair game is, like, for example, in the internal Scientology documents that Mark has been exposing on the spy files, we know that they were hacking our phones. They were doing special trash collections. They had somebody walking by our house every day. As Mark described, they had private investigators following us. When we moved from California to Colorado, there was somebody filming us as we're driving down the highway. You just go, what planet am I on where this is a thing? You just can't make up this shit. Excuse my language.
No, you're fine.
That's my blood pressure rising.
Right? No, it's like, oh man, I'm famous. Yeah, record me. That's not why they're doing it. But you have been getting a lot of attention. I must admit, this has really been cool. You were on the Australia. What was the name of the platform?
60 Minutes Australia.
That was a wonderful, really cool piece that had you and your husband in. I hope people go watch that. That's on YouTube too. So if you want to go see it. A few more here. Constellation Pegasus says, you're a courageous woman. It takes a lot to leave what you thought was the truth. enjoy your freedom.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate you tuning in.
Absolutely. Constellation is like the only one here, like throwing super. You're awesome.
Thank you, Constellation Pegasus.
How much literature does Scientology print for the members for studying? Watchtower are the masters of keeping the members busy in that way. Masters second to none. Impressive when I look back.
That's a really great question. So a Scientologist is required to study 2.5 hours per day, minimum of 12.5 hours per week, as are members of the Sea Organization. And there are volumes and volumes and volumes of L. Ron Hubbard policies that are printed. Then on top of that, there's a whole computerized database that has even more documents that are, tomes and tomes and tomes. Even there's 2 specialized dictionaries that are like 3 inches thick each that just cover the terms and language of Scientology. So yes, Scientology members are kept very, very busy studying and, reindoctrinate, keep active, keep reporting. There's many mechanisms of control built into that organization.
I really can't tell you how thankful I am that you came on, and I definitely want to do this again with you. I want to get your story, but we must shamelessly plug your SP channel here for people who are interested in committing Scientology heresy. Go check out Blown for Good Scientology Exposed YouTube channel. You've grown significantly. How long ago was it when you started this?
Well, so Mark started this way back in 2008, and then Aaron Smith Levin in December encouraged him to start putting up content. So really in December is when we started at it. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, you seem to be having fun with this, so why can't I join in? So I kind of barged in. It was originally his channel. I'm like, you know what? This is unique. Let's make it a joint effort here.
Right.
So yeah, we've really been uploading. We've been doing lives and uploading 1 or 2 videos most of the time every week since December. So yeah, we're very, very grateful for the growth that we've been having and just continuing to do our part to get the message out. And yeah.
I sincerely appreciate everybody in the chat. Constellation said 2.5 hours a day, 2.5 hours. Wow. Watchtower is not competitive.
There you go.
And here's the book on Audible. You can get it on Audible. Make sure you
and Mark, I will shamelessly plug Mark as a phenomenal storyteller, and he did the audiobook himself. So
let's tease people. I should actually share it so they can hear it. Let's see.
Oh, you can do that. Nice.
You should be able to hear it.
Chapter 1, Walking in My Shoes. They are driving right alongside me in the black Nissan Pathfinder. The roads are slick from the rain, and I am in no position to do any sort of maneuvering with my bags on the motorbike. I round the turn past the golf course heading into town. For a split second, I contemplate going off-road down into the riverbed, but with the rain, there is a good chance that it might contain water, and it's just too risky with the security guards right on my tail.
You got to go check it out. The book is there, and then the website as well. So in what ways can people help? They could subscribe, they can get the book. Is there any other options here?
I would also recommend if there's any Scientologists listening, find out for yourself, listen to all the books, go to YouTube. There's all kinds of SPTV channels that have popped up of people telling their stories. And if you need help getting out, the Aftermath Foundation was created to help people start their lives over again after leaving Scientology and the Sea Organization with no support system in the outside world. So we've been able to help people get out, reconnect them with their families. We've taught people to drive, helped with resumes, you name it, we'll do it. And so there's a safety net to help people that need it.
And how common is that people reach out through there?
Very common. Wow. Yeah, we've been working to expand the programs that we have. So for example, career mentorship, education, Obviously helping with immediate housing needs, transportation, and just helping people get their lives started over again. And there's nothing more beautiful than that.
Yeah. Wow. A few more people last minute. Samuel Edwards says, thanks, Claire. This has been an eye-opening, and thanks for pulling the curtain on Scientology.
Thank you so much for being here, Samuel. I appreciate it. Thank you for your kind words.
And Robert Taylor showing the love. Thank you, Robert, for the love. No question or comment. I want to make one remark that I mentioned early on before we hit record here, Claire, and that is you and Mark will go live on your YouTube channel. I guarantee you there's endless questions and things that you could ask. Their treasure trove of ideas and things, practices that have happened. You probably have plenty of haunting stories that you tell, and people can go over there,
Yes.
watch you live. They can super chat, ask you questions. You have Mike Render on sometimes, Aaron Smith Levin with you sometimes, various ex-Scientologists will join you. So I do want to see people go over there and subscribe. I hope that they do so. Any final words from you, maybe some encouragement or pertaining to the case, anything?
Just again, my greatest support of the victims in this case, the Jane Does. Again, they had to go through testifying on brutal crimes perpetrated against them, not once, but twice. And I'm just very grateful that the judge allowed for Scientology to be involved, because it was involved. So, just remember that the first trial had giant pieces of the picture completely missing. And so that is, just factor that in. And again, I'll recommend Aaron Smith Levin's coverage of the trial for the day-by-day testimony of what went on and the case that was presented by the prosecution. So that covers it all. And thank you for having me on today and for helping me spread the word. And yes, I'd be glad to talk about my story another time. And I'm sure Mark would love to come on too.
Thank you. I really appreciate you, Claire. Everybody go check it out. Hit the like button. Let us know what you think down in the comment section. Show us some love and check out Claire's channel. Check out Mark. Be on the lookout because we're going to do some more together. And never forget, we are MythVision. Thank you so much.